Hello and welcome to this week's exciting program, The Repairer's Voice, a program designed to explore the Hebraic foundations of our Christian faith. And Anthony and I today are excited because we have with us a special guest, one who is no stranger to you. One of the voices God has raised in our generation, standing for the people of Israel, the nation of Israel, at this critical time in history. He is the presenter of the Middle East Report, the European Report, and Politics Today. He's also a conference speaker. And we are humbled and excited to have him with us today, Mr. Simon Barrett. You're welcome to the Repairer's Voice.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure, Evelyn and Anthony. Great to be with you guys today.
We are humbled. Anthony, maybe you want to also greet the viewers?
It's so exciting. I've been meaning to see this day, and I can't just thank God enough that he's been able to make time off his busy schedule to spend this couple of minutes with us. We're very honored to have you. Simon?
Pleasure. Thank you.
God bless you, sir. Your passion is fuel for all of us who are pushing forward the mandate for Israel, standing with Israel. I mean, we draw a lot of strength and encouragement when we see you on the Middle East program.
Very true.
And today we want to start this discussion by finding out your background, how you started this journey. You know, because it has been a journey.
Absolutely.
So we leave you to start.
Okay, where do I start? I think it starts really kind of in my teens. When I was 14, I gave my life to the Lord Jesus Christ.
Amen.
My mother's been a strong Christian, so she had a big influence on me. I always, growing up, knew that God existed, always knew he was there, and I'd say little prayers and he would answer my prayers. So always had that kind of presence of God growing up. But I think it's when I was 14, and then you recognise the significance of the cross and how you've got to take personal responsibility. And I went to this particular camp called Wick Camp up in the Wye Valley for a week with other Christians around my own age, and that had a big influence. But the big influence on my life then was athletics. That was my thing, running and sport. And I was very much influenced by Eric Liddell, the star of the 1924 Paris Olympics, who won gold, despite the fact that he refused to run on a Sunday. So at school, I decided that I wouldn't actually compete on any races on a Sunday. So I got quite a bit of ridicule for that at school, but then I kind of, that strengthened me in my walk. And then till I was about 16, and the Lord really kind of touched on my heart that running and athletics had become number one in my life. And you know what happens when something becomes number one, God wants to deal with it. So I ended up giving up my running at that stage, you know, for the Lord. And then the Lord gave me a kind of vision in Revelation, gave me a profound love for Israel and the Jewish people, and an understanding of the prophetic events when I was 16. And that just literally turned my world upside down. I was interested in politics and history before, but this just took on a kind of new meaning, and Israel became a big obsession. But for me, also the events of the first Gulf War in 1990 had a profound impact on me. It describes as the first media war, in which the world's attention and eyes were on the Middle East after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in 1990, and then seeing the international coalition forces gather in Saudi Arabia to take on Saddam and his regime and liberate Kuwait. And the whole of the world's media was focused on the Middle East. And then there were questions raised, for example, in my mind, like, why is this small little country called Israel, are they so concerned about? Why are they worried about this small little country getting involved? And that provoked questions and what have you. And then a year later, after the Lord gave me a vision and an understanding of Israel, that kind of made sense then. And then I went on a journey where I became kind of literally obsessed with anything I could read about Israel. So I'd read newspaper articles, I'd read books, documentaries, and so on. One particular moving documentary I saw that was aired on Channel 4 in 1992 was called Birth of a Nation by Abba Eban, who was described as Israel's most articulate spokesman, and he was a foreign minister,
Right.
did a whole series going throughout Israel's history. And it's like, for example, Israel's very much like an onion. The more it's got so many layers to it.
Right.
The more you unpeel, the more fascinating it becomes.
Like an onion.
And the more you understand about Jewish history, the more fascinating it becomes. So having this as a kind of, in my late kind of teens, into my early 20s, having that huge passion for Israel and not being able to share that with other Christians my own age because they don't get it or haven't had that revelation was quite difficult. So it wasn't really until I went to university where I studied modern Middle Eastern history and modern Hebrew.
Right.
And that was not my choice, that was God's choice, because I wanted to do a degree in international relations. I wanted to do this at Warwick University, and there was something on the UCAS form for applying for universities, and the Holy Spirit just popped up, just spoke in my heart, and just said, "Put down Jewish studies at the University of Manchester."
Wow!
I don't want to do that, but all right, Lord, I'll be obedient to you. I will. So I put that down, and then a few months later, the first university I hear back from is University of Manchester. So went for an open day. Then they revealed that they're doing a brand new course that wasn't even on the perspectives, called Modern Middle Eastern History. And that's when I knew in my heart that I had to be in Manchester. And having spent a lot of time living in the southwest of England, it was a big culture shock. Going from a small, very small kind of agricultural town, going then to a kind of big city like Manchester. So that was where I met Israelis for the first time.
At Manchester?
Manchester University, and Jewish people. And it was there in my department, which is pretty much a pro-Arab department. Being pro-Israel was a bit of a challenge. And I remember learning Hebrew as well, finding that extremely tough, because the other students were Jewish, so they had an understanding of the Hebrew alphabet. And having to learn two alphabets, one that you read and one you write. And then instead of reading left to right, you read right to left. And I was like, Lord, I want to give this up. This is too tough. I said, no, stick at it. So thankfully I did. And it was during my first year at Manchester that I went to Israel for the first time with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem for 3 months. To actually be in the land for the first time. And the one thing I remember most about being in Israel was my first flight on my own. It was the first flight I've ever been on by myself at all. First time I've been out of the country on my own. And then to land in Tel Aviv and to land at night and having to wait like 4 or 5 hours to get up to the Hebrew University of Jerusalem to pay my check and then find the kibbutz where my course was done, which was near Haifa, was a challenge. But I remember very clearly just landing and seeing the Hebrew writing on all the shops and the coffee shops at Ben Gurion Airport, and then taking that cheroot all the way up from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and seeing Jerusalem for the first time was something to behold. It was incredibly special. And I remember paying my check-in at the Hebrew because at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, we got these incredible views right from Mount Scopus over the whole of the old city of Jerusalem. And typically Israelis, I said, look, I'm here to pay my checks. I paid my check-in for the course to enroll. And I said, I need to get to a place called Kibbutz En Shevet, which is in the north of Israel. So they kind of responded by saying, like, I'm sorry, but I'm an Israeli. I don't even know. So so that was my first introduction to Israel. I remember then getting a bus from Jerusalem to Haifa, and on the radio they're listening to Oasis and the Spice Girls with soldiers with M16 assault rifles. So that was my first introduction to Israel.
Amazing. Amazing.
So you had a shock of your life, right? You thought you'd be having some sort of religious undertone of music. You know,
it was it was an eye-opener. But those 3 months were by far the best 3 months that I had in my life. I met amazing friends. We had 4 Europeans, and the rest 28 were American Jews. There was only 2 Christians on our course, so that gave me a huge and a wonderful introduction to Israel. So we worked on a kibbutz. We learned Hebrew on the Orpan. We had trips around the country. We had lectures. I remember getting up early. We'd play like water polo after after class or after work, play football in the evenings, and then study and have lectures and then trips as well. So it was an amazing time. And when I left Israel, I kind of felt like I'd left my heart behind. And I was just longing to actually go back. And my big concern with Israel was that I had such high expectations that I thought that my expectations were too high, but they weren't. And it wasn't there until, being there and to pray in the land and to be in the land and was a fabulous experience. And then I graduated from the University of Manchester, where I did an internship at an organisation called Memory, which is a Middle East Media Research Institute in Washington, D.C., because I had heart to go to Washington. But the Lord had to get rid of all the rubbish that I'd learnt in the course. So I was working in a bar for a year in close to where my parents live, and thinking, what am I doing this? But the Lord was just getting rid of all the rubbish that I'd learnt from university, all the things that I had the wrong perspective on, or academic perspective on, and then went to Washington. And then the Lord just opened up the most fabulous doors for me. I ended up meeting ex-presidential advisors. I ended up meeting some very influential, what you call neoconservative Jews, and they became amazing people. And one of the guys I would literally give up an entire afternoon in his office to have discussions about Israel and the Middle East was an amazing guy called David Wormser, who was a senior Middle East research fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. And then he went on to become Dick Cheney's main Middle Eastern foreign policy advisor in the White House under the Bush administration. I got personal tours of the Pentagon, where I met officials in the Pentagon as well. And that just gave me this incredible hunger to understand policies and relations to Israel and the United States. And then I came back, and then a couple of years later, ended up working for the Zionist Federation for a year. That was tough. Great to be in a kind of Jewish environment to work there, but very difficult. And then I ended up setting my own kind of media organisations up, dealing and working with the mainstream media, the likes of Sky, BBC, ITN, national newspapers, in giving them news stories about Israel and the Middle East. And then in about 2008, 2009, I ended up joining Revelation TV, and that's the rest is history, as they say.
Hallelujah. That is an amazing background. It's always good to have the background to the passion. That's an amazing, and it's very important for us to know how he began, because many of us might be beginning the way he is shared. And you might think you're not hearing right, but keep praying about it and ask the Lord to lead you. It's an amazing story, Simon, you have. And this program is actually exploring the Hebraic foundations. We started this a few months ago, exploring the Hebraic foundations of our Christian faith. Before we go to today's discussion, how important do you think this is?
It's vital, because it gives you that kind of overall perspective of who God is. And, we serve and we worship Yeshua HaMashiach, the Messiah. He was a Jewish rabbi. All of the entire disciples were Jewish. There is one nation that starts with the book of Revelation, starts with the book of Genesis, and finishes with the book of Revelation, and that's the nation of Israel. So without understanding our Hebrew roots, without understanding where we come from and how as Christians we're kind of grafted in to the olive tree, you have a very limited perspective of who God is, his ways, and how he deals with people. And this is the great danger of church replacement theology, and this is why I'm so opposed to it, because if God made a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that's an everlasting covenant. He doesn't break those promises or covenants. So therefore, if God can change his mind, then he can change his mind about us. There's no assurance or guarantee of faith or salvation if you believe in church replacement theology. And those that hold to that position fast is either through ignorance or it's through jealousy. And there's no blessing that comes with it, because you only get a blessing. You only get a blessing from the Lord when you bless his people. And the more you enter into a personal relationship with God, do you understand his love for his people and his land, because it's so overwhelming that you understand his heart, you understand his love, and therefore what can you do?
Because being engrafted in, you're engrafted into the family, you're adopted into the family.
Absolutely.
It doesn't negate the existing family.
No.
They are there first.
No way.
You are engrafted in, you are adopted in. And Anthony, you've been sharing with us, because we've been exploring some of the errors in our foundation, as well as some of the treasures.
That's it.
And last week we started talking about some of the errors. And you took us right to the beginning, to Genesis chapter 3,
Correct.
and brought us right to the apostolic era.
Yeah.
But you know what? Today we're going to leave that there, because we have Simon here.
Absolutely.
And we're going to focus.
Get a lot from him.
Yes.
We want to squeeze everything that we can get from him. So
Exactly.
That, you know,
Exactly.
we have, so that everything will be properly, established.
Established,
so that
yes.
we can continue with this.
So today we're going
program.
to launch in to the postmodern World War II era.
Yeah.
Because 1948 was a very special year, isn't it?
Yeah,
Let's take the lid off.
Well, the reason why the 14th of May 1948 was so significant is because what we saw was the re-establishment of the modern state of Israel in fulfillment of biblical prophecy, ushering in the end times, or the end of the end times. Now, we have to look what happened prior to that Declaration of Independence by David Ben-Gurion, and look at the 3 years previously. We had 3 years previously the darkest chapter in Jewish history. The fact that the Nazis murdered over 6 million Jewish lives on an industrial scale.
Which some people still deny today.
But you just have to meet Holocaust survivors. You only just have to see personal accounts to realise that you can't deny that this went on. And those that hold such views should be ashamed.
And Simon, before you even continue, why should I, as a born-again believer, be concerned about what happened a few years before 1948 and beyond?
Because it shows that this is a move of God. Because on the one hand, you have the darkest period in Jewish history. And if you can imagine 6 million Jews being murdered by the Nazis, they created gas chambers in order to kill as many Jews as they could. And the heart of the Nazi ideology was Jew hatred. And that's what drove the Nazis, is what drove the SS to round up the Jewish people and to murder them. And you then realise that after this most horrific period of world history, particularly for the Jewish people, came the rebirth of the nation of Israel 3 years later. Only 3 years, which is absolutely extraordinary. And so, therefore, out of the fire, the phoenix bird flew. And that's what we see, the phoenix from the flames. It was a rebirth of a nation, and that in one day the nation of Israel was declared. Now, it would have been amazing to be a believer and to witness those events, to see the nation of Israel reborn on one day, to see the United Nations back in 1947 declare and accept Israel's independence as a sovereign nation. Because this is something that's been in the hearts of the Jewish people over 2,000 years since they were exiled by the Romans in AD 70. They were spread throughout the entire globe. And in our day, we see that restoration of his people, which marks the countdown for God's prophetic time clock, meaning that if we want to understand the times and the seasons, then we need to know what's going on in Israel in order to stand where we are in terms of God's master plan, because he's coming back to Jerusalem.
I love that, coming back to Jerusalem.
And it's a subject that many of us are not really paying attention to, because like you're sharing, 1948, the nation was reborn after several years of being scattered all over the globe. And now they are going back, and many of us are not even paying attention to this big miracle. We know about the parting of the Red Sea as a watershed moment in history, but this is also a miracle in time.
I mean, the day that the nation of Israel was declared, Israel was attacked by 5 Arab armies, the one to destroy at birth.
You mean the day that the nation was declared?
Right. So,
Simon, this is why we need you here, because some people who didn't understand, don't know about this, that just even as the nation was declared, immediately they were confronted with hostile enemies. take the lead off there for us, please. Give us more.
Well, you had the Iraqis, you had the Syrians, you had the Lebanese, you had the Jordanians, and you had the Egyptians attack Israel after Israel was declared by independence. The New York Times at the time believed that Israel would only last a week. And many of the fighters that were fighting for Israel's independence were Holocaust survivors who escaped the Shoah, came to Israel, and then found they had a gun in their hand to defend themselves. Israel had no air force. They had no tanks. And what the British did was they gave...
Sorry again to interject. You mean in that period of 1948, when they were declared, they had their independence, they had no air force?
No air force.
How many tanks do you think they would have had at that time?
They wouldn't have, 2 or 3.
And how many, the number of the Arab enemies that were surrounding them?
They would have had a lot.
A lot,
yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
So can we not just see that God's hand is in this?
Absolutely.
Please continue.
So after the New York Times declared that Israel wouldn't survive a week, President Truman, who was then the US president at the time, actually, because of his Christian convictions, believed that he would support an independent Jewish state, despite the fact that his own intelligence community and the State Department saying this is a lost cause. This new nation of Israel won't even last a week or 10 days at most. So we see this ragtag army that was set up, known as the Haganah, became the Israeli Defense Force, and the fact there were 2 main divisions within the Israeli military. You had the Haganah, which was led by the kind of more secular, left-leaning influence of David Ben-Gurion, who was Israel's first prime minister, because they were socialists, and then the more kind of right-wing organizations called the Stern and the Ingram gang. And they were 2 separate factions. Now, they were very much influenced by a guy called, what's his name? It'll come back to me anyway. But the influence was that Israel, after seeing what happened in the Holocaust, the Jewish people, that they had to defend the nation of Israel no matter what the cost, because no other nation is going to look after us. No one's going to provide security. And if we don't fight for a state, then we face another Holocaust. And that's what Israel was facing in 1948, the prospect of another Holocaust. Yet after 18 months, Israel managed to win that war and repel the Egyptians and to repel the Jordanians and the Syrians, and then had our own state. And this is where we see Israel's artificial borders after 1949, called the Armistice Lines. And there, Israel went from strength to strength. And what was so extraordinary as well during Israel's inception was the fact that Israel won the support of the Soviets as well as the Americans, because the original first government was kind of socialist and left-leaning in Israel. So therefore the Soviets felt that they could align themselves with Israel because they shared a similar ideology. And of course then the Americans also, because of the support of American Jewry, believed that this was an important thing to do for their own domestic constituency, and also then to have an ally in the Middle East in the emergence of the Cold War.
It's very interesting because all this sounds political, but then it's the will of God for Israel to be reborn. And they were reborn in 48. And this concerns you and I. It concerns all of us. Because like Simon rightly said, the physical and spiritual restoration is needed in the end time for Jesus Christ to come back to. He's not coming back to UK or Ghana from where I come from, but he's coming back to Israel. So there are certain things that need to happen in history. And as much as it sounds political, we need to be interested. We need to be mindful. You know, I heard somebody say recently that the earth is always in disorder when Israel is out of their land. How true is that?
Sorry, say that again?
The earth is always in disorder. There's disorder all over the world.
Well, no, I don't know if there's disorder in the world, but when it comes down to the land, the only people that have prospered in that land have been the Jewish people. Because when you look at the first wave of Aliyah, and Aliyah means the return to the nation of Israel, but literally in Hebrew it means to go up.
People.
To go up to God. So during the 1882 was the first wave where some Russian Jews decided then to flee the pogroms in Russia and go to Israel, but they were inspired by socialist ideas of Marxism, and they made their way all the way to Israel and established what's known as the kibbutz movement, or the kibbutzim, which are agricultural villages throughout Israel, and that was how it was founded. Now, for those early pioneers, their own families considered them dead and said there was no way you can come back. They actually had burials for them because they didn't want them to go. So they went when this land was a hostile land. It was controlled by the Ottoman Empire. You had problems with malaria. Huge problems of malaria. It was a dust-bound land. Nothing grew. Nothing could very grow. And Mark Twain, the famous writer who went there in the 1860s, said he walked all day and only saw 2 trees in the whole of the land. So when the Jewish people came back, they brought agriculture. The land started to prosper. And then in the 1920s, we see that what was known as the Rothschilds actually built what is now known as the Jezreel Valley for over $20 million, which at the time in the 1920s, 100 years ago, you're looking at hundreds of billions of pounds today in today's
a lot of money,
And all it was swampland. So what the Israelis did is they brought in eucalyptus trees, and the eucalyptus trees drained the swamps. And through hard work and toil, they cultivated the land. So there was always been a big Jewish presence, and that was building up until the re-establishment of the State of Israel in 1948.
You know, this is all very interesting, and we need to all be mindful of these information in our foundations, because this is very close. This is from 48 to present days, and their journey from 48, when the nation was born, has been very rough. But the thing is, we're almost running out of time today. So we're going to continue, because this is very interesting. It's not political. This is a part of our history, Christian foundation, that we need to be mindful of, so that we're able to do what we have to do in this end time to support the physical and spiritual restoration happening in the nation of Israel. It's all part of our Christian walk. And we are very excited that Simon is here with us, and we're going to pray that he can be with us next time so we can continue. But before we go, Anthony, would you like to maybe pray for the peace of Jerusalem?
Yes. Father, we just want to thank you again for this time, that you've given us a voice to speak to your people. We bring your people into your hands. We ask that you continue to let your spirit move in the midst of your people in Israel.
Amen.
You commanded, it's the only place that you commanded us to pray for a nation. And this day we lift up Israel before you. We pray your peace to be in their homes.
In the name of Jesus.
At any time they gather to actually even celebrate their times of Shabbat, may your peace resonate in their room. In Jesus' mighty name.
Amen.